Hello, welcome back. We are here for another guest speaker series with Sky's the Limit Fund. I'm Brenda Zane. I am a board member with Sky's the Limit Fund, and I have the honor of talking with some incredible guests on our speaker series. And today is no exception to that. A quick introduction to Sky's the Limit Fund. If you're not familiar, we're a nonprofit organization that helps fund wilderness and make wilderness therapy accessible to more families. So we have incredibly generous donors. So if you're a donor and you're watching, thank you so much for the work that you do to help us take families who are really in a place of crisis and young people who are in a place of crisis, that might be an adolescent or a young adult, and help them make that shift into a wilderness therapy setting. It is not always an easy process, and so Sky's the Limit Fund is really dedicated to helping those families through that process, not only with wilderness therapy, but also with coaching for the family and for that young person when they come home. So pretty unique. And we do the speaker series as a way to give you information. A lot of times when you're in this decision, either you're trying to decide if wilderness therapy is right for your family and your child, or if you're just sort of gathering information, it can be hard to find good information from people who are living in this form and modality of therapy every day, have years and years, often decades of experience. And so that's what we do here, is bring you that information. And today is going to be a great conversation with Chris Tarver from Aspiro Adventure Therapy. And Chris is a therapist there. He's been working in wilderness for a very long time. I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit further. So welcome, Chris, and thanks for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. Excited to talk to you about it.
I am really excited. I took a peek at what you're going to be sharing with us today, and I think it is a conversation that we just don't hear enough about fathers and sons. And I guess fathers and kids in general, but why don't you do a quick introduction? I did see that you were originally from Louisiana, and I'm wondering, how does a guy from Louisiana end up in Utah?
That's a great question. Let's see here. I was born and raised in Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I graduated from college from LSU in, I think, 2005 or 4, no, 2000, somewhere around there.
Somewhere around that area.
Yeah, life had given me some lemons and wasn't going very well, and I was looking for some changes, and so I was single, and I loaded up my truck with everything I owned and moved to Utah. I think 2004. Yeah, I moved in 2004, and was doing some more schooling in Utah, and someone told me about a wilderness program, and that I might be a good candidate to work as a guide there. And so in 2005, I think around April, I started working as a guide, and I did that throughout the entire summer into September, and then around September 5th, Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana, and I decided that I was needed more at home, and so I packed everything up again after about a year and a half of Utah life and moved back to Louisiana. And about 5 or 6 months after getting home, maybe if that long, I met a young lady who's my wife, Heather, and we started dating, and she had children, and I always wanted to get back to wilderness, but I figured I need to go back to school, and I got a master's degree in psychology at Southeastern, and then realized that a master's degree in psychology without a doctorate is useless. There's not really much you can do with it. And so I went back to school and got a second master's degree in social work. In this time, I married into 2 children, my older son, Zane and Seth. And then shortly after that, we had Keegan, who's now my 13-year-old. He was born right before I graduated with my master's in psychology. And then my daughter, Cambry, was born right after I graduated with my master's in social work. And
Wow.
so
You got
4
a full
kids.
house.
Yeah. And then it was shortly after that, probably um, uh, about 3.5 years after I graduated, I met the man who was my mentor in wilderness before, Shane Gallagher, and he was speaking at a conference that I was invited to go to, and just so happened we ran into each other again. And it wasn't a couple months later, he was offering me a job to come to Utah and Kanab and be a wilderness therapist, which was always my dream to get back to Utah. But I thought a
Right.
wife and 4 kids, I didn't think it was going to happen. And
Wow.
one was a senior, one was a junior, and then the other two were young in elementary school. And the wife had never left Louisiana really to live outside of it, so I didn't think it would happen. I turned down the job, and that was, I think, in June of 2016. And then in August 12th, 2016, our house took on 32 inches of water. I mean, 5 foot of water. There was a
Oh,
storm on the coast of Louisiana that dropped about 32 inches of rain. And in that process, destroyed everything we owned. The schools were all destroyed. All the homes in 2 cities were destroyed. You may not have even heard of it because it wasn't a named storm. The news doesn't like something if it's not named, right? And
right.
so most
Got to
people
have a
never even know
brand
what happened.
attached to it.
No, nothing that was attached to it except for the fact we lost everything. And so,
Mm,
um, about 3 months into living with my parents in a 3 bedroom home, a family of 6, and my mom and dad, and my wife looked at me and goes, "Have you thought about that job in Utah again? I'd like to go somewhere drier." And I'm like, "Yeah, sounds good." So I called, and the original position they was gone, but they said, "No, we want you up here." And next thing you know, I'm living in southern Utah in Kanab, Utah. Um, and so I've been in wilderness here for a little over 5 years, doing therapy for right around, I want to say 10 or 11. Um, and yeah, so that's who I
wow.
am. That's what I do.
That's what you do. So you're, just to clarify, so you're one of the therapists that goes out to the field to work with kids during the week, is
Hmm.
because that's kind of the model that, if people have been watching this speaker series, probably come to understand that kids are in most programs and some programs out in a field. They may be hiking in sort of a nomadic model. And then the therapist actually goes to them out in wilderness, which is so magical. So that's what you do.
Yeah, our program, I started off in nomadic. I was a guide for a nomadic program, and then I originally started off as a therapist in a nomadic primitive program. Now, as Spiro Adventure is a little bit different. Uh, they're not nomadic, but they are out in the wilderness. They stay in the wilderness 24/7. But we incorporate weekly itineraries where they may do mountain biking somewhere, or canyoneering, or
Okay.
they may go hike in the mountains of Tabby, or they may go canyoneering, or rock climbing, or in the wintertime they may do some skiing. And we
Okay.
utilize both the nature part of and the wilderness part of therapy, but also the adventure part, which has been, well documented. It really gives them some shifts every week into some different perspectives, and challenges them in different ways.
Right.
So yeah, it's very similar. And I go out on Mondays and Tuesdays. I do therapy with the kids, do my groups, work with the kids, and then they go get to use what I teach them and what we work on in therapy throughout the week, and different experiences,
Yeah.
in the group model. Yeah.
Awesome. Incredible. I just love the model. Having seen my son go through it, and just the transformation that can happen out there is incredible. And I know today we're going to be talking a little bit more about, less about maybe adventure therapy, and more about the relationship between fathers and their children, and specifically sons. And so I'd love to have you just share a little bit about kind of what frames that, and then we can get into some of the details.
Yeah, I guess, when I present this, I put my credentials as: first, a son; second, a father; third, a licensed clinical social worker, right?
Yeah.
I believe to talk about this topic is really important to me because I do see the importance of who my father was, and I hope that um, I have some in my relationship with my sons, that I have some importance there. Um, and one thing I noted in the last, as I've been looking at who fathers are, who men are in general. I mean, you really look throughout the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, the fatherhood was really kind of not looked down upon, but marginalized, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Homer Simpson, you look at Al Bundy, you look at who fathers became. We became the comic relief, really, for the
Right.
family unit.
Yeah.
We went to work and we come back and we cause more problems in the family unit than we solve. We're less of an integral part, less of a equal part with mom.
Yeah.
We disappear, come back, and we cause problems. And usually they create funny moments for everyone else. And I understand it's part of comedy, right? Um, Bill Cosby may have had some run-ins and some issues outside of his TV show, but in reality, his TV show was one of the last ones that portrayed for a long time a father who went to work and came home and actually provided and worked side by side with mom and gave a good example of hard work, of work
Right.
ethic, of care, love, mentorship, teaching, and then it just kind of disappeared. And then I think you started to see reality start to mimic um, the portrayal of fathers. There are
Mm.
several studies out there. One was done in 2015 that shows that less than 1% of commercials in TV shows that they studied and analyzed showed the father in a positive light,
Wow.
right? And that's an interesting concept to look at. Um, and so I started noticing in when I was a guide in the field, what was that, 2005, I said, somewhere around there. I noticed I was struggling with some of the young men that I was working with. I had a group of young men. I was the lead guide, and I really worked to connect. And I was in this group week after week after week, and I was struggling to connect with these 8 young men. And one day I was just sitting on top of the mountain and I'm watching the group. They're about 20 feet below me. And I'm just sitting there thinking, how do I help these guys? What am I going to do? Why am I not connecting? Um, I'm doing everything I know, everything I can to connect. And all of a sudden it hit me. You're struggling because they're a lot like you were and you're not realizing it. And I
Yeah.
was like, what do you
Wow.
mean? So I sat down and started listening to them a little bit more. And I heard the same story. They were from very successful fathers, and none of them felt like they measured up.
Hmm.
Right? Um, if you remember, I said I moved to Utah to go back to school because life was giving me lemons. Life had not gone the way I wanted it. I was like 23 years old. I wasn't progressing toward. I didn't know what I was going to do for a career. Life had really gone crazy, and I'm sitting there listening, looking at my dad, who's very successful. Right?
Yeah. A lot of
My dad is
pressure.
very successful, but my dad is not rich. My dad is at the time was an electrician at a plant, but he was working and known within that his industry, where and he did what he was supposed to do. And even though some people think, "Oh, well, I'm not a rock star. I'm not a surgeon. I'm not a lawyer." My dad was an electrician, right? An instrument
Yeah.
technician. But in my mind, he was successful in the areas that I thought were important. He supported his family. He had a family, right? He was doing everything
Yeah.
he could to make sure we were successful. He loved us. He did everything he could, and I'm just sitting there looking at him going, my dad, who barely made it out of high school, eventually became a millionaire,
Wow.
right? And so I'm sitting here looking at these young men below me, about 20 feet below me, and I'm watching them, and I realized there's a common theme between us that we need to discuss. And so I climbed down the hill and I began to talk to them about their relationship with their fathers. And almost every single one of those boys said the same thing I was feeling at the moment. I'm a failure.
Wow.
I don't measure up, right? How can I
Mm.
succeed? Am I ever going to be like that? And it began this idea in my head in 2005 of we as young men see our dads, whether our dads are in our life or not. I mean, they could be estranged. They could have left the day we were born. They could have not even existed as far as our moms go, as our family goes. But there's some kind of connection that every single one of those boys, even though they came from different backgrounds, they all experienced it and they were all struggling with it.
Mhm.
And I noticed that once I started discussing this with them and building on this theme, it was amazing how we connected. It's amazing the work they did. That was in 2005. Um, and like I said, I eventually left. Um, and I didn't forget about it, but it got placed in the back of my mind for a while, right?
Yeah.
Um, because it wasn't the pertinent thing. I soon met my wife dealing with a hurricane, rebuilding and trying to help rebuild where I could after Hurricane Katrina,
Yeah.
going back to school. And then it was um, after I moved to Utah and began to work in wilderness, it hit me again, um, right? Working with a young man that I call Sam. Um, that same feeling came about, but this time it was different. This time I'd done my own work. So instead of being this countertransference kind of thing, it became more of a I got your number. I see what you're struggling with, young man. I can see it. The red flags mean our first conversation. He's telling me his dad's a jackass. He's telling me my dad is this, my dad is that, and he's going off about his dad. And I'm just sitting there going, "Oh, you got dad issues. Let's talk about that." Right.
Yeah.
And little by little, I found out how much pain this young man was in because he just felt like his dad was a superstar surgeon. His dad was a superstar college athlete. His dad, and it goes back generation to generation of this superstar person. And this young man felt like I failed. I made a C, it was in physical science in ninth grade. I will never measure up. And it was
Right.
that moment of making a C in physical science that his world turned upside down, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that began a new journey for me regarding what I do, and how I treat young men um, I don't ascribe them all this phenomenon or this issue, but it's amazing how often it comes up. Um,
Yeah.
and that at that moment, I started doing more studying and developed the presentation, and hopefully soon to be the book, Sam, the son of a superhero, the kid with no powers.
Hmm. Wow. It must be so great for those kids to have somebody see that in them because it doesn't sound really counterintuitive if a kid is saying, my dad is a jerk, they're really putting their dad down and being very negative about them. It's not intuitive to then think, oh, this kid really respects and looks up to their dad. So it must be really interesting for those kids to have somebody like you be tuned into that and to be able to share that with them and to relate in a way that can help them work through that.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. The aha moment these kids have is very interesting. Sam himself, the moment when he wrote a letter to his dad, at the very end of the letter, he said, "I know now that I'm not just your son, and you're not this superhuman individual that I can't ever ascribe myself to or even think to be like. Instead, you're human just like me. We make errors." The
Mm,
key, what I found is parents in general, we went through adolescence. I don't know if you remember adolescence. Do you remember it?
I do. I
Yeah, it
absolutely
sucked,
do.
most likely.
Yeah.
It was pretty good at
Terrible.
moments, but it also could have been terrible. And there you're trying to figure out emotions, you're trying to figure out relationships. You're starting to, in elementary school, everybody plays together on the playground. We're playing kiss tag, we're playing chase, all the things that have been banned now. I don't know if they play anymore. Dodgeball,
Right.
whatever we played, right?
Dodgeball. No, there's no
Can't
dodgeball. It's
play
way too
that, I don't know
dangerous.
how many broken bones I got in elementary school playing on the playground.
Yeah.
Um, and so uh, those things shift towards middle school as we begin to click off, as those hormones begin to take in, puberty begins to hit. Those things shift, and all of a sudden you're stuck in adolescence, and you're stuck in those high school teenage years. Cliques begin to form. Who was your best friend now is part of this group over here that you are not a part of, and now you've lost your best friend. You don't know who you are. The uphill battle that it is to be an adolescent, and then you take the social media and the crap that we have today,
Right.
and it's exacerbated that
Yeah.
entire adolescent experience. And so a lot of times as parents, and I find myself doing this as a dad, we get so caught up in tackling the next mountain of adulthood, making sure the bills are paid, making sure that, I mean, I've got more hours in treating other people's children sometimes than I have with my own children if I'm not careful,
Right. Right.
right? And so I begin to try to climb mountains with kids and join them on their journeys, and my own children sometimes are sitting there on their own mound, right? This little mound they're on, struggling to get up at 13 years old or 14
Dad,
years old.
dad.
Like,
Yeah.
hey, here I am. And
Yeah.
I'm so focused. And I look back and see him struggle. I'm like, oh, he'll get it. It's just a little mound. I've already done that one. That sucked. I remember. But I don't think to go back and tell him that.
Yeah.
And so I get so caught up. So parents in general, we really sometimes lose focus of where our child is. And again, I'm not one that blames parents. I'm just saying that um, sometimes we get caught up. And so when you look at that father-son relationship, how does it, one of my theories is dad goes away to work. Before the Industrial Revolution, dad and son would sit in the blacksmith, and son usually learned how to be a blacksmith,
Yeah.
right? Not only did he learn the work ethic, he learned to cuss with dad. He learned to yell with dad. He learned to what it meant to screw up. He saw his dad in his weakest moments. He saw his dad in his strongest moments.
Right.
Industrial Revolution came along, and all of a sudden, dad's walking out with a briefcase. Dad leaves for 9, 10 hours, doesn't come home, sometimes for a week or two, sometimes the whole day. You get me the last 2 or 3 hours of daylight, you
Right.
know? And in that time, I'm freaking vegging out because I'm exhausted.
Right.
And what does the son see? The son just sees Superman leave the door, come back, conquer the world, comes home with money, comes home with what he needs, right? He sees him succeeding. He doesn't see the failures. He doesn't see
Yeah.
what it took for dad to get there. And that's what Sam learned in the letters between him and his father, as he and his father dealt with the same stuff.
Yeah.
But dad's on a whole new mountain. And dad doesn't
Right.
talk about the mountains that the son's now climbing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you've got kids who are in a program, in a wilderness program or an adventure program. What are some of the things that a parent might see if this is happening? So if the kid is still at home, is it the typical
Oh,
sort of substance use or aggression, or what are some of the indicators that this kind of disconnect might be happening?
that's awesome. Great question. It's funny. Um, what I find a lot of times is a huge disconnect between father son. It's what you were saying earlier. It sounds counterintuitive that I put you on this pedestal and you've become um, quote unquote God to me,
Yeah.
right? You've
Yeah.
become this person I'm trying to emulate. I'm trying to be like. And one of the things I looked at that really hit me hard was my own my 13-year-old Keegan. Uh, when he was about 3, I'm sitting there, trying to work on my truck, and I turn around and there he is with his little Tykes car upside down with my drill trying to remove the wheels. I watch him mowing the grass with his little bubble mower behind me, and I watch him doing everything I'm doing, and I'm just so excited as a dad that he's emulating me, praying that he doesn't emulate the things that
Right.
that I do that are screwed up. And so what do? I hide them, right?
Mm. Yeah.
There's a song, a country music song that talks about this, right? About I want to be like you, Dad. I'm watching you. The
Yeah.
last thing we sometimes want is our kids to see our greatest weaknesses because we're afraid they're going to follow us, and therefore
Right.
we hide them. And this is how many dads I work with. And so, what do these kids do as they get older and they begin to see things and realize even if they don't see the weaknesses, they're like, "Holy cow, I can't do that." I had one dad tell me, I didn't realize the daunting task my son was looking at when he started getting older as a teenager. We live in the Bay Area and where everybody's multimillionaires. I live in a neighborhood where homes are, the smallest maybe 10,000 square feet. And here I have my son
Right.
who is looking at me very successful in all these ways, looking at me going, how in the world am I going to get from a teenager living in a 22,000 square foot home or even a 9,000, or in my case, when I was a kid, 2,400 square feet? How am I
Right.
going to do this?
Yeah.
And so what they do is they begin to, once they start to experience some failure within themselves at adolescence, what they begin to do is that anxiety begins to build.
Mm.
Anxiety then brings on depression. And so they start thinking, there's no way I'm going to be like dad. And so what do they have to do? They have to destroy the idol.
Mm.
They begin to tear it down little by little. They begin to, if they can't find the weaknesses, they begin to develop the kryptonite themselves.
Yeah.
And they begin to destroy Superman. And not only do they destroy Superman, but eventually they start to find an idol that they can emulate that's easier. And a
Right.
lot of times they will begin to look for young men in their own life or older men in their life that are not quite as successful. There's a lot of them struggling the same way they are.
Right.
We relate. And then all of a sudden they start going down paths that are contrary and perpendicular to dad's path. And so when
Right.
you ask what are the symptoms, I mean, it could be many things. It could be substance abuse. But what you really see is you start seeing a disconnect, a disengagement, disengaging from their dad.
Right.
And sometimes it's dad's fault too. I mean, that's part of dad going to work and not paying attention. And that's why I really, when I'm doing this, what I'm trying to do is get dad and son back on the same page to where, dad, maybe you should worry less about the mountain you're trying to succumb right now and climb. Maybe you should go back and get on the mound with your son
Yeah.
and walk
Wow.
side by side for a little bit.
That's so powerful. It's really something I can resonate with personally. Just as you were saying that, I was like, "Yep, yep, yeah." It was all the, just kind of saw that happen. So, just kind of, I know that it's very in depth, and there's nothing that could be resolved in 5 or 10 minutes. But if that's the case, what is the solution for dads? Is it to be more vulnerable with their kids, or what are some of the first steps that you try to kind of offer up to dads who might be trying to deal with this?
First of all, recognize where you are. Um, in my presentation in the book, it's called bridging the gap, right? You're both on two sides of a river.
Mm,
And it's important that I start to bridge the gap and somebody has to make the first move. And 9 times out of 10, it has to be dad,
yeah,
right? And you
yeah,
have to start building the bridge one brick at a time, one block at a time back towards your son. He has to see that effort. So recognition that we're on the wrong side, that neither one of us are on the same side of the river. Quit insisting that he come to your side of the river.
I was going to say it seems like that might take some humility, especially if you
Mhm.
have a very powerful, very highly successful man who might not be used to doing that, especially with
No.
a kid who is being very unlovable.
Yeah, the one you want to choke every
Yeah.
now and then.
Yeah, that's hard work. That's really
Right? I've
hard
had
work.
many dads say, "I just wanted to choke him." I'm like, "He probably wants to choke you too."
Yeah.
I know, 'cause I'm a dad.
Yes.
I was a son, right?
Yeah.
There are moments we want to choke each other, and that's not acceptable. Not doesn't need to happen. So let's come
Right.
up with a different solution, and humility and recognizing the fact that your son is struggling, seeing him as human, and that comes a little bit from the Arbinger principles, right? Have a heart at peace with your son first.
Yeah.
You've got to develop the heart at peace with your son before you can actually go in, and then you got to work on building the relationship, and that's the part of going back across the river.
Mm.
Um, I've as I've been studying this, I found a study. And oh heck, let me make sure I read her name right. Um, let me make sure I get this right. Anna Hochgriff. I guess that's how you pronounce it. If I get it wrong,
Okay.
sorry, Anna, if you're watching this. Um, she's a doctoral candidate at Penn State, and I've been studying this, and it's hard to find studies, really good studies about fathers and sons.
Mm.
Um, a lot of really, I mean, if you're really looking for books about father and son relationships, there'll be a ton come up, but they're all religious based books. Not that I have an issue with religion. It's just
Right.
it's not a lot of it's founded within the theory of psychology or behavioral health, mental health.
Right.
It's very theological in its stance. Um, and this study caught my attention because they were really looking at how the title of it is developmental timing of parent youth intimacy and protective factor of adolescent adjustment problems. Big long title for saying parents intimacy with their children will help them develop better.
Okay.
Make it
I
simple,
like
right?
your translation of that. Yes.
Yes. Very simply stated. And what they found was fathers role in the family and their intimacy and affection with their children played not just a key role in the way children's self-worth and self-esteem were established, but also depression and anxiety was less significant. They found a great role, and not only did they find a great role, but they found that it was even at times greater than mom's role.
Wow.
Because moms kinda play that role naturally, so when dad plays it, it adds an added protective factor to the children, and so one of the things I've noted, if you were gonna do anything to help your child, whether it be your daughter or your son, and this could be from mom or dad, but if I'm looking at dads, put your arm around your kid.
Mm.
The greatest experiences I have with my own 13-year-old, in all honesty, come at night when I'm tucking him in bed, right?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
13. He might get picked on if someone watches this that knows him, right? But dang it,
Yes.
I don't care because I'm still gonna lay down beside him. I'm still gonna talk to him. I'm still gonna tell him how much I love him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you right now, a friend of mine, Jesse Quam, calls this collecting points.
Mm.
We screw up as dads, guys. We screw up. I can't tell you how many times I've had to look at my kid and say, I screwed that one up, man. Give me another chance. I really screwed that one up. But you know what makes up for that? Whenever he walks up and says, it's okay, dad, let's do that again. It's those moments.
Right.
I'm preparing for this experience. And so I'm going over my stuff. I'm kind of working on my book. I'm going over my notes. I'm doing things that I'm going over some things. And my son walks in last week and he says, Dad, he races dirt bikes. He says, Dad, there's some races coming up. My dirt bike is knocking. We need to take the top end off of it. I suck at this kind of stuff. That is, I can do carpentry, plumbing. I can build a house. I've remodeled my house, but when it comes to small motors, I'm not that good.
Right.
And so I'm hesitant. And my son looks at me and goes, Dad, can we go work on this? And I was like, buddy, I've got this book I'm working on. I've got this presentation I got to do on father son. I suck. I suck. And he looked at me and goes, what? And I'm like, dude, you don't know I suck. I suck at being a dad.
Oh.
And I shut my computer. I said, let me do better. And I went out to the garage, and next thing you know, we got the top end off the dirt bike, and we start taking parts together. And as we're done, he goes, hey, Dad, thanks for working on the bike with me. I know you didn't want to do that.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I
So
really
powerful.
didn't, but I really wanted to be with you more. That's really what it meant. If you want to know what you're going to do different for your kids, you can read all the books. You can come to me as a therapist. You can do all kind of things. Just connect, build the bridge back to them, meet them where they're at. I suck at video games. My son actually bought Madden 2000, whatever. He hated those games. Why'd he buy it? Because he said, "Hey, Dad, will you come play football with me?" Right? Next thing you know,
Yeah.
we're playing football in the video game. I suck. And I said, "Why'd you buy football?" He goes, "Because I knew that'd be something you'd want to play with me." I'm not a video game guy,
Right.
right? What was he trying to tell me?
He just
I'm
wants
trying to
time with
connect
you.
with you, Dad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They want time with you. So powerful. It was, I love how you said, you can read books, you can see the therapist, but I think we all know innately when we need to have that connection and we need to physically touch each other and give each other a hug. And that can be hard to do when you have a kiddo who is angry and really oppositional and, doing very bad things. Um, and so I imagine there's a lot of work there for dads in particular to be able to, like you said, cross that river and to be the first one to cross the river because
If you
that
don't, someone
is
else will.
yes,
And it might be a
yes,
16-year-old boy who's struggling with marijuana and alcohol and other addictions and
yes,
behavioral issues. Somebody's going to meet your son where he is. If
yes,
it's not you, it will be
100%,
someone.
100%. Yep. Yeah, and probably not a healthy person. Maybe if you got really lucky, but probably not. So,
No, not today,
wow.
especially. Back in the day, you
Yeah.
sent them off to work in another in a blacksmith, right?
Right, right.
Back in the
Yeah.
day, your son would, if you couldn't do it, you sent your son to go work somewhere else, and you tried to give him a positive example. Now in high school, they connect with their own people. Freshman kids are
Yeah.
dealing with seniors who just screwed up their entire school year, high school experience, you know?
Right. And, I work with a lot of moms who have kids like this and they turn to this kind of I don't know if it's a term, but this thug life and gangs because the gang life really provides that sense of family, sense of power, successfulness. And so I see that and I experience that with my own son. Very scary, very, very scary, to see that happen, and so I think your work is so timely. When is your book gonna be finished?
I'm in the process of writing it. There's something you see, I do well with this, right? I can communicate verbally with anyone. Putting it in writing, on the other hand, not as easy.
Right.
And so I'm in the process of trying to take my knowledge, my understanding, my experience, and my passion, and putting it into writing in a way that other people can tolerate, and hopefully, when they read it, are like, "Man, I don't care how great the topic is." I don't know if you've read a book like that, how intriguing and engaging the topic is, but then you read it and you're like, yeah, I got through the first 3 chapters and I can't read anymore. I've got several of those sitting back there on the bookshelf. I'm trying to make it to where not only will a dad wanna read it, but the child will also. The son will also want to
Wow,
read it. And so
that's a task.
that's a tall task to try to write across 2 different, age groups and yet connect and engage and give the same give what I'm trying to give here in writing.
Yes. Well, I
I still
wish
have
you all
someone
the
to
best
publish
in
it.
that. I wish you all the best in that because I can't even imagine, but this has been incredibly powerful, and I know that um, when we post this on the Sky's the Limit Fund website, we'll put links to where people can find you and find Aspiro. Thank you, Chris. This is so important. I just hope that a lot of dads will find it in particular, or moms will forward it on as a nice suggestion for them to listen to. So thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to Spiro for being one of our amazing partners in helping more families get access to wilderness therapy. we love being able to partner with you guys and get some kids in crisis some help. So it's great to know that we might send one, they get to work with you.
Hey, Brenda, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really do consider it a blessing. You guys are
Oh,
awesome at
it's
what you
great.
do.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, we love it. And we're just grateful to work with partners. And we will be back next month with another guest speaker. So stay tuned and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.